something that was certainly helped in sort of demystifying the BLM lands, and had quite a bit in there for us all to learn. I'm just going to go ahead and just quickly say we're going to have about a 20-minute Q&A.
Okay.
PJ will be, who is our co-founder, will be moderating this conversation. And so let's get started. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Josh. Everyone, this is Josh Jackson, the author of The Enduring Wild. And we are so happy that you are here. Thank you so much for attending. I was going to just say a little bit about Josh, and he is a writer and photographer who highlights America's often overlooked public lands managed by the BLM. His work blends storytelling imagery to reveal the beauty and vulnerability of these misunderstood landscapes, appearing in outlets such as Highland Country News, Los Angeles Times, Adventure Journal, and more. Be sure to check the link in the chat to learn more about his work and the Forgotten Lands Project, where he expands his work through talks on public lands, conservation history, and guided camping trips with the USAL project, which I'm very interested in. Josh, thank you so much for being here tonight. Before we get started, Josh, is there anything you'd like to share about yourself or the book?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. As an avid reader, I just love that when you're writing a book, you just dream that, some book club out there will think, oh, this is a worthy choice. And then they'll all read it and talk about it and then get on a Zoom call. So for me, this is like a true joy and honor to be with you all. I'm coming in from Los Angeles, where I live. I have 3 kids, 16, 13, and 10. And my wife and I live here in the heart of Los Angeles. That's kind of where I'm coming from. So it's really an honor to be with you all. Thanks for being interested in public lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. So we have a few questions in mind, but feel free, everyone, to raise your hand or drop them in the chat, and we can go ahead and let's start with the first one. Is there anyone that wants to start?
Well, I have a few. First of all, it's such a great book, and being from Ohio, we've lived in several other states, but not in the West. So to open a book like this and see, I did a lot of work in California. I thought I knew a lot about California as a non-Californian. Now I'm thinking I don't know very much at all because I'm learning by reading the book. I was interested too in, you mentioned Bureau of Land Management, and I know the Forest Service owns a lot. People think of national parks when they think of public lands, right? Most people do, but Ann and I go to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We lived in Michigan for a long time. We go to the Upper Peninsula. There's a lot of Forest Service land, and there's a little bit of BLM land. So I was interested in your friend who told you to go out and try out a BLM. When I think of BLM, I think of land that's not available for anybody, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was very surprised to read this, what you were writing about people being able to venture out and camp and do things on Bureau of Land Management land, which I just now we'll look into what we can get from the Forest Service of Michigan.
Now that we know it's accessible to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. I grew up in Michigan, so I'm a Michigander at heart. That's where I went to high school and kind of grew up with my siblings. And I remember as a kid, like the place I fell in love with wild places was this little 1 acre kind of wooded place in the middle of a cornfield behind my house, and it was about a 1/4 mile walk And that's this little tiny one measly acre is where I started to fall in love with wild places. You know, it was the place where I learned to build forts and start a campfire and climb trees. And in the summertime, when the corn was high, you know, it felt like I was entering my own little Narnia through a portal of stalks, you know, that were 8 feet high. And when I moved out to California 20 years ago, I was, you know, astonished by the amount of public land here. I just couldn't, there's nothing in me that could grasp that 50 million acres of land in California was open to the public, you know, shared and owned by all of us. And, you know, I even in Michigan, where I grew up, pretty close to Lake Michigan, you know, there was access, beach access was lined with fences, and the only people who could access the beach were if you had enough money to buy a home that was above that beach. Where here in California, no one can own the coastline. So it just, even things like that kind of took my breath away. I fell in love with national parks and state parks and national forest lands, you know, in those first 10 years when I got here. And I had never, even as an avid outdoor enthusiast, I had never even heard of BLM lands before. And like you said, until my friend, I couldn't find a place to camp. I was looking, you know, I had a 5-year-old and 2-year-old and newborn. My 5-year-old and 2-year-old, of course, I read about this in the book, where we were pretty desperate to get out. And he said, why don't you camp on some BLM land? But he didn't really know where it was. So I got on the old BLM website, which feels really dated, even still. And yeah, I had my first experience on BLM land, and that kind of started this obsession 10 years ago that's now grown into a book. And this whole, you know, I was a furniture maker for 18 years, sold that business a couple years ago to pursue this more conservation work full time. So yeah, there's 245 million acres across the West of BLM land, and it's all open to the public. There's 300 plus campgrounds. You can disperse camp anywhere. It's really quite a remarkable that we all own this and have a say in how it's managed, whether you live in Ohio or Michigan or New York or California.
And my understanding is it's fairly well protected. Am I right?
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, yes and no. Here in California, we're a little more lucky because I would say, you know, 8 or 9 million out of the 15 million acres we have here are protected as conservation lands. So they're primarily managed for recreation and conservation. But then you have a place like Nevada that has 46 million acres of BLM land. And, you know, most of that land, there's some areas of land in that are protected as wilderness areas and so on and so forth. But it's just been so heavily grazed and so mined that, you know, it's everywhere you go there, you can see the impact of grazing. So yeah, it is protected, but it's also, it kind of is managed differently in the different states, I would say.
Do you believe that we have a good checks and balances as far as the different BLM, Congress, the public, other conservation agencies? How do we even have a checks and balances?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's important to remember with all of our public lands, especially our BLM lands, is that because we all own and share these lands collectively, we actually do have a say in how they're managed. So any new plan, like a new mining company that wants to come in, or like, you know, mining gold or lithium or whatever, they have to go through the BLM. And the BLM has to open up that plan to the public, and then the public weighs in through what's called a comment period. So if you live out west, you're familiar with public lands, you kind of have this, you have a pulse on what's going on, and you have a say in how it's managed. So in that way, you know, sometimes the Congress doesn't listen to those comments, right? Like in 2017, there was the review of national monuments, half of which were managed by the BLM, and you know, 99.2% of the comments were in favor of leaving the monuments alone. but even despite that, 99.2% Bears Ears and Grand Escalante in Utah were reduced drastically in their size of monuments. So yes, we have a say, but we're not always listened to. But I think the fact that we do have a say is really important, right? And I think it's also, as I've gone so the BLM, they're in the western states, but then they have these field offices. So in California, we have 14 field offices, and each of those field offices have a huge staff, and that field office is a big part of the decision-making process for, like, Northeast California or the Mojave Desert. And these are BLM employees that live and work, and obviously they work because they're in the BLM, but they live in those areas too. So when they're conducting these studies, and scientists and geologists and hydrologists are coming in to look at these different plans, these are people that actually live here and want to see the best for the land. And I feel like sometimes that gets lost. People think, oh, all these decisions are coming down from Washington, but that's not actually how it works. A lot of these management plans that are happening all over the West with BLM are really driven by the local BLM field office and the local residents who are sending phone calls and comments and stopping by that field office to say their 2 cents. And you can disagree kind of like on what you think is the right thing to do, obviously, but the fact that we all can come, and like the rancher can come and have his opinion, the OHV, rider can have their opinion. I can come in as a hiker and have my opinion. Someone else as a bird watcher can have their opinion. I think there's a lot of beauty in that democracy, even if the checks and balances in terms of how they respond to those comments aren't always, not everyone's going to be happy about it. But I think the system in place up until now is pretty good.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah.
I have a question. So in the book, I love how you remind readers that nature isn't only found in remote wilderness. It's right outside your doors. And you wrote, I had walked by the sycamore hundreds of times without ever actually seeing it. So how important do you think that these neighborhood micro adventures are in shaping our connection to nature? And how often do you think we should make time for them?
I love that question. I think that was probably one of the biggest things I took away from, spending 5 years of my life and my family's life out in the middle of nowhere on BLM land. I think the first thing BLM land does is, it's not as the show-stopping scenery that like a national park is. Sometimes it is, but oftentimes it's like a much subtler form of beauty. Like there's seas of sagebrush, and the Mojave Desert, it's a lot of sand and kind of interchangeable mountains, and the colors are more muted. And so for me, as I was going through there, it really reoriented my idea of what I find beautiful. And so, part of that I write about in that first chapter, like the pilgrimage idea of like moving slowly and noticing. And, I always prided myself on like mileage and elevation gain, and getting to the end of a hike and getting to a beautiful waterfall or a mountain summit or a raging whitewater river. And BLM land kind of reorients your idea of what your expectations are, but also what your idea of beauty is. And I think in slowing down, in recognizing beauty in more subtle, nuanced ways, every time I came home from a trip, it was like I started to see my neighborhood a little bit more vibrantly. It's like, if my neighborhood started at and I live in the heart of Los Angeles. I mean, I have, bodegas and taco shops and old junk car yards right within 3 blocks of my house, and grocery stores. And, we're right in the heart of LA. And I felt like if I had started these trips kind of seeing black and white in all around me, it felt like every trip I went on, I saw a little bit more color infused into my neighborhood. So that by the time like 5 years had gone by, I just felt like, oh my God, there is an entire universe of flora and fauna here that I had never, like the sycamore, like I had never really noticed before. And, if we're gonna, with the anthropogenic pressures that are mounting from all different, not just society, but climate change, if we're going to make any headway, it's going to include people's yards and private landowners who are making their yard, here in LA, there's a big movement of getting rid of your lawn and instead planting native plants that, draw butterflies and insects and fence lizards. And we have coyotes in our neighborhood. But yeah, I think I just started, my idea of beauty was reshaped, that allowed me to see the beauty in my neighborhood that I just had never noticed before. And to answer the second part of your question, since these trips, I do like a 3-mile walk every single day in my neighborhood. And I know I'm lucky because we live in a climate where we can do that all year round. But those walks have increased that beauty that I see. Like my youngest daughter is really into learning tree names, and so she often goes on these daily walks with me. Sometimes she won't do the 3 miles, she'll do the 1 mile, but we've learned so many tree names in the last 2 or 3 years that we can name pretty much every tree we walk by when we walk to go get coffee or to the grocery store or the train station. And just learning the trees, even if they're like not native to California, we have like half native, half non-native trees in my neighborhood, and even just learning the non-native ones, all of it is changing our relationship to the place that we live. And I guess to add on to that, we can get into reciprocity later, the idea of reciprocity. But I think learning to see the beauty in my neighborhood, it made me more likely to want to invest in my neighborhood. So like we have a city park that's 2 miles from our house. I've gone there a million times. I've never once thought about joining a volunteer day to go clean it up, until like the last couple of years. We have the LA River, which is, famously, it's concrete, and it kind of flows out of the mountains and redirects out to the ocean. But Friends of the LA River is this amazing organization that's doing amazing restoration and cleanup work on the river. I had never once thought about, like, why would I care about this river that flows through concrete? Is it even that important? Not that I thought those exact words, but it wasn't until my reorientation of beauty that I began to see that beauty here. And then, of course, when you see beauty, you're more likely to want to protect that beauty. So, yeah, sorry, that was kind of a long-winded way of answering your question, but
So that was fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
And I love that your daughter, is learning all the names of these trees, because how many trees do we actually know the names of? We can identify them by how they look, but not necessarily know their name.
Yeah, and I think that the power of naming something, it intrinsically changes your relationship to it. So when you look at a tree, and if you look at you're out in the forest and you see a pine tree, and you just think, oh, whatever, and you see like a bird, and you think, oh, whatever, you just keep walking. But if that tree is like a Tawani pine and it's an acorn woodpecker that you're witnessing in this tree, you can't help but changes your relationship to it. You just can't help but think, oh, and then you get home, like my kids, they've gone through school where like they pick an orca whale or an orca to study in school. What happens like 3 months later? Orca is their favorite animal. And every time we go out to the ocean, they're like, I wonder if we're going to see an orca. It's like the more you name something, you learn something about that, and then you kind of can't help but fall in love with it.
I know you mentioned too about, you have this idea of looking at nature within your own neighborhood, but I was really struck by, I too, Peyton, was really struck by when he talked about that, because I live in Florida and we don't have any BLM lands, but we have like Pines Prairie and Kanapaha Botanical Gardens and Devil's Mill Hopper. And every year I tell myself, I'm going to go look at some nature. Every year I have this grand idea that I consider to be like this destination location. Now I'm in Florida. I am surrounded by nature, yet I feel as though I have to go somewhere to visit it. And I actually listened to the book.
Oh.
And while I listened to it, when the part came on about the guy that was sitting there looking, and kind of the questioning is, what is this guy looking at? It made me stop and think, I have this beautiful tree out front with a woodpecker, and I have squirrels. I mean, literally, I have this in front of me,
Mhm.
but I never think to stop and look at it.
Mm.
Yet I'm sitting here listening to a book about nature, about California, which I may never get to visit, but yet I literally live in the Sunshine State.
Mm.
So I really thought that was very, throughout all the storytelling and throughout everything that was discussed and all the history, it really brought it closer to home for me and made me feel
Mm.
like, well, I may not be in California, but I am here in Florida.
Oh my God. I mean, that's just music to my ears. That's what you just dream of as a writer. That someone will take it wherever they're living and, like, think about it. I mean, I think about that guy in the lawn chair that I wrote about all the time, like I still just can't believe that he was just sitting there for like 10 hours, just never moved. Like he just looked out. It was like such a moment. That guy taught me to slow down and I didn't even talk to him. I just witnessed him.
On that note, I'm curious if you have any advice for someone who's like kind of just learning more about nature, whether it's close to them or whether it's public lands. Do you think that there's I mean, you explained how it took you 5 years to start seeing like full color in your neighborhood,
Mm.
but do you think there's a teachable method to, get somebody to that point where they know what you're talking about and where they really feel immersed in nature?
That's a great question. I've been wrestling with like how to put some of these lessons kind of more into practice, and so I kind of I'm not sure. Like I know what I'm trying to do that seems to be working, but I also don't feel like I have any good answers, Like for me, I work for this USOL project, and their whole mission, it's based in LA, is to build community with Angelenos, but also to introduce urbanites into nature. So I lead these 3-day camping trips all over California, mostly BLM lands, but sometimes like I'm going to Death Valley in 2 weeks. And these are like Gen Zers that have never been camping, half of them. Like, we get in a circle on Friday evening and I'm looking at these nervous facers who have like never slept in a tent, never cooked on a stove, never heard coyotes howling at sunset, never dealt with elements. And it's crazy that in 3 days we gather in the same circle on Sunday afternoon as we're leaving, and everybody's talking about like the best part of that weekend. And I hear that I've done it so many times now. I just expect that they're going to say the same things, which is always like, I never knew this existed. That was so healing. Life changing. I hear these same things over and over. So one of the things that I've been able to do with these younger people is like, obviously for me it wasn't 5 years, because I started this whole thing 5 years and now we're talking on Zoom, but it was a slow process. A couple years in, I started the color started changing in my neighborhood. But anyway, one of the things I see with these trips, they're very immersive, and it's wild that it's like 3 days can do so much than like a year of just doing little walks here and there. And it's almost like, if you're dating someone, and like 3 months in, you go on a week-long vacation, and it like adds 7 months to the relationship, rather than just dating a little bit here and there. You just throw yourself in. And for me, these trips are like throwing these young people into this environment that they've never been in before, and then talking about those ideas of bringing that feeling back home and recognizing that the beauty here that's more subtle is also in our backyards. So that's one thing that I've been doing, is leading these trips. I know that everybody can't do that, obviously. For my family though, and my friends, it's honestly walking. Like walking the neighborhood, and like what we talked about earlier, learning the names of trees and some of the lizards that you might find, or the butterflies. It sounds so simple, but you do that over and over again, and like you're walking through the neighborhood and my daughter's like, now she has nicknames for all the trees. So like she's building this relationship with trees, and it just grows and grows and grows, you know? I don't know. So I don't know. I feel like that's a good question that I'm still wrestling with and wanting to answer, of like, how do we bring this to more people? I guess the third thing is that, you know, these nonprofits and these little friend groups that are existing in Florida and Ohio and everywhere, these are like the frontline nature workers to me. They're doing incredible work, and they're the easiest gateway for us regular people to get involved. They already are doing it. So like they're providing these opportunities, and they're providing all these different ways for people to engage with their public land, whether it's a city park or a neighborhood playground or whatever. Plugging people, as many people into those nonprofits and friends groups, is really, you know, because we also fall in love with nature by like engaging with it through volunteering. Like you can't help but go down to the LA River and pick up trash for a day and then just be like, yeah, it kind of sucks out there. You're like, no, I want to go back and do it again. And you can't, it just, without even knowing it, your relationship to the LA River changes. Every time you drive by, you think, oh, I was just down there 3 weeks ago picking up trash. Now there's more trash. I'm going to go back and do it again. Like, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Absolutely. That, you know, you just bringing this to light with the volunteer groups and the even the nature centers. Recently did a field trip with a Montessori school, and that we're working with Nature's Playbook, and I just love how much they take the kids out in nature, and they're like elementaries through middle school and beginning of high school, and they took the kids to a local lagoon that we have a trail on, and just did a whole science lesson on biotic and abiotic, and then, you know, how does the runoff from the highway into the lagoon, how does that factor into everything, you know, and the health of the lagoon. And now I have those glasses on, like I'm walking like abiotic, biotic, and
Right.
what's affecting that, you know, what's affecting that in this ecosystem. But having that nature center and exposing that to the Montessori school and just listening even as an adult was a learning experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have like Audubon nature centers here in Los Angeles that do amazing events with all these school children, like that, you know, public schools in LA are all going to. Even like the garden programs at my kids' elementary school, where they go and like they grow food and they're learning. This is like an LA public school. Those little connection points are also valuable, you know. There's also more good books. I think was it Alistair Humphreys wrote a book called Local, and he basically I think he's based in Europe somewhere, in England maybe, and he just spends like all of his time for 1 year going to nature within, you know, 30 minutes of his house, and he wrote a great book about, it's called Local, I think. But yeah, for me, there's no, it's like if we're just going to go out and kind of go out into nature and take, and if we don't bring it home, there's really no point for me to go out there. Like, I know nature is healing, and I know it's amazing. It's like all those great, it's the antidote to some of the pressures of life, and I believe in going out there. But my goal now is to like help people bring that feeling and that work back home, or they do it out there too. You know, there's lots of nonprofits that work on BLM land and forest land and park service, and that was something I wrote about too. I felt that I had a one-way relationship with nature, and it, you know, it just felt unfair to kind of go out there and feel great and feel healing. And I'm also privileged enough to be able to afford to get in a car and drive out there and take a weekend off where I didn't have to work, you know, like, and then coming back and then just going back to normal life. It just felt, you just had that empty feeling. So it's almost like twofold for me, like introducing people to the outdoors from the city on these trips, hoping that they fall in love and then they're more likely to protect those places, but also that they'll come home, see nature here, and then want to get involved in protecting it at home. Because it's so much easier because we live here. It doesn't cost us anything to volunteer on a Saturday morning at our local park, you know?
Do you know, Josh, you mentioned Rachel Carson, and I read a beautiful book about her not long ago. And when she was writing Silent Spring, she had written The Sea Around Us, and she became, you know, a notable, I mean, she was this remarkable marine biologist, but she also, I mean, she became beloved by literary societies because she was also such a gorgeous writer. But while she was writing Silent Spring, she was dying. She had a catalog of health problems, heart problems, she had cancer. You know, she was in her late 50s, and she had sole custody of a little nephew, and she was burdened. And she was, wow, she had some good friends, but she was alone. And to think that she was the catalyst for that whole environmental project, you know, really the mother of it. And, you know, JFK happened to pick up her book, Silent Spring, and it just changed our world. So, you know, she's always been one of my heroes, because I think to myself, wow, she was alone, she was sick, and she did this. You know, surely I can do one of these Sierra Club projects. And back to your story about, you know, walking with your daughter. I retired from Columbus City Schools, and I taught, you know, these were urban, low socioeconomic children. I mean, and fortunately, our school, we did have grass and we had trees, and we made arrangements for these children to have to be outside 3 times a day. And we went out in all weather, because these little children couldn't play outside. It wasn't safe for them to play outside. There was not a safe place for them to play in their neighborhoods. Anyway, and kids need nature. We all do. But little children.
Yeah, but even those that's what's so wild, is that even just those little moments at school are so valuable, you know, especially with the age of screens we live in. I mean, I have a couple of Carson books right there. Yeah, she's a hero of mine. I wish she had lived longer, because I think she could have had a bigger voice, and as climate change was becoming more of a thing. I think she was so beloved, you know, and I so revered by both political parties. And I think she could have had a real impact on talk of climate change, just like Aldo Leopold died way too young, and could have had a huge, you know, his legacy beyond Sand County Almanac would have been so important. But, you know, at least we have Silent Spring and Sand County Almanac.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are you all from different places?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, we're in Ohio.
Ohio, Florida, where else?
Carlsbad.
Minnesota.
Denver.
And I just,
Georgia.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So, Josh, this is Scott. I have a question for you. I was intrigued in the book about you talking about your kids, and then you've obviously got a passion now and how you got them out. So I'm going to ask this question kind of backwards a little bit. But have you thought about, I'm sure you have, if you hadn't gotten your kids out on this journey that you've been on, learning the BLMs, I mean, what would they be like today without that experience and without these walks that you're talking about? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. We were such outdoors people, literally from when my first daughter was born, who's 16 now, we committed to doing 30 nights a year camping. So we had been doing this before I even knew what BLM lands were, my kids have all, you know, my oldest had easily done 125 nights in a tent. We had a pack and play that was a travel pack and play that we literally put inside the tent. And all of my babies were in that thing, in a 6-person tent. So my kids have definitely been immersed in nature. We didn't always hit 30 nights, you know, like sometimes it was always 20. That was kind of my wife and I, our goal. In 2020, I think we did like 44 nights in the tent. So, with the pandemic, it opened up some time, but I will say that I do think BLM lands have reshaped their lives because of how it's reshaped my life, right? So like even with all those camping trips we went on in state parks and national parks, like I had never really brought those lessons home until the BLM stuff. And so I do think it's massively shaped their life just because it's really shaped mine. I don't know if I had never discovered BLM land, I don't think my daughter and I we'd know 50 trees in my neighborhood now, you know? So I think that same reorientation of beauty that I went through, they've also gone through. You know, I had never taken my kids to Yosemite, you know, because we've just been state parks and sequoias, and they had never been. Anyway, my parents they live in Indiana and they're obsessed with Yosemite. They make an annual pilgrimage out there. That is like their place, right? And my parents a couple years ago were like, hey, we want to take all the grandkids to Yosemite. And so my sister's kids and my 3 kids went, and they went for a week and they camped in Yosemite, and they get back and my son was like, and he didn't know I had been to Yosemite. You know, I've like walked Half Dome, like I've done it multiple times. And he's like, Dad, if you think BLM lands are beautiful, like you need to go to Yosemite. Like it's unbelievable. And I was like, oh, I've been there. And he's like, why didn't you take us there? And I was like, well, we've just been going to BLM land for 5 years, you know, like there's no time to get to Yosemite. But yeah, so I think they were very immersed in nature. But I do think this BLM journey has certainly shaped them. I also think, I mean, this isn't nature related, but and I know if any of you are parents, you can relate to this, but you know, like doing this project and writing a book is while having a full-time job, while having 3 kids, is such an undertaking. And there were so many days when I felt like quitting, like, I don't think I can do this, you know? And I remember 2 different settings where I was like kind of at the valley of valleys of just wanting to stop and just thinking like my life would be so much easier right now if I just raised my family and went to work. And us having like a state of the family kind of talk in our living room, this happened 2 different times, and just like crying, telling my family, I don't know if I can do this. And them just like rallying around me like, no, you got this, you know? And then seeing it all the way through, and now having this book like that they can look at and sit on their coffee table and flip through, that they're a big part of. You know, just seeing their dad go through this and following through and finishing it. I mean, I hope that like really speaks loudly to them and their own dreams and their, you know, the sacrifices that you make. I woke up at 4:30 every day for 3 years straight because I could get 2 hours of writing in before I woke up the kids for school. Like seeing that kind of commitment. So I hope beyond nature, it's had a good impact on them. That was a little off topic, I know, but
no, that's great. I wanted to hear about your kids, so that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that.
You know, I didn't even think about the fact that my kids have, like, when you start the book, they're 5, 2, and like 0. And then when we take that last trip at the epilogue, you know, my oldest is 15. It like didn't occur to me until I started going on a book tour, and people would be like, did you know your kids were like in your whole book, they're like growing up? I mean, the pictures in the epilogue my daughter took, who's 15, and she starts out at 5. It's just so crazy I'm so glad they ended up being a big part of it, you know?
Yeah, it's pretty clear in the book.
So
That's what caught my attention. It's pretty cool.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah. And what a great example
Well,
for
you're
Go ahead. I was just going to say your description of your writing was phenomenal. I mean, I felt like I was there when I was reading about Mojave Desert and the flowers, the wildflower. It's like, I was telling my husband, I was like, we've been to California a couple of times, but we've never done anything like that. I'm really kind of anxious to get there and see these places that you've described. Your writing is beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind. It was hard to figure out always, how much travel and adventure mixed with some of the policy stuff and some of the threats. It took a little while to get my footing and feel like, okay, this is a story I want to tell. But I'm glad it resonated for you.
So you did for a lot of people. It's beautiful.
It really, you wrote it beautifully. And I was wondering when you were writing it, because you did include a lot of lessons there. There was a whole part of, ecology, but I think we got history. We got, of course, about the tribes and about the Wilderness Act and different policies. So there's a lot of history there. And I feel like I kept seeing this lesson of when people had an initiative, and then like this whole process of getting something done was having an initiative and then bringing unity, bringing others into it. And then making this commitment and knowing that there's going to be trials and there's going to be setbacks, but just that perseverance and recommitting and it taking pretty much everything, every process you described took years to accomplish. And I thought, what a great lesson, because so many times we do feel like, what can I do? Or you feel like, kind of throwing the towel in, like, oh my gosh, now there's this setback or that. And I just thought that was a great testament into, staying focused and committed to something that you care about.
Yeah, I wrote about that a lot in the radical center idea that I talked about in the Berryessa chapter, because I kind of couldn't believe, like good policy takes a long time and bad policy takes no time. And that's kind of how it's been our whole as a democracy. But I remember looking back on some of those amazing environmental laws that were passed like post Silent Spring, like the margins in the House and Senate are like almost unanimous. And you think, oh, they just had it so easy. Like, and then you go back and you study like the Wilderness Act and you think, oh, it took 8 years, 66 drafts, 16,000 pages of testimony. Like the Republican John Saylor, who introduced the Wilderness Act in 1956, there's a quote of him in 1961 where he's basically so pissed. He's just like, I can't believe you guys all care about money more than land. Like that was 5 years after he did it. And it still took 3 more years to get it across the finish line. I was always amazed about, how long these things took. But this radical center idea is so important, especially today, as the radicals kind of get pushed out towards the extremes. Like the new radicals are those who are trying to live, in terms of conservation at least, trying to live somewhere closer to the middle, where persistence and a little bit of compromise and like that's how we need to get things done. I mean, you saw it this summer when there was, I don't know if out east or in the Midwest, if you heard as much about the land sell-off, the BLM land sell-off in Utah and Nevada, but ultimately that was thwarted because we had this crazy broad coalition of recreationists, from hunters to bird watchers, who all gave a shit and fought against it, and ultimately was removed from the big beautiful bill. I personally, politically, I'm left of center for certainly, but like I have a lot of friends in my business world and stuff that are right of center, that are hunters and OHV riders, and I wanted to tell a story, that included that other people besides just environmentalists on the left. And part of that was, I was writing about these places I was going, but as I was going through these places, I was always reading like an incredible amount of books that were having a big influence on me. And so like I tried to subtly work in these big ideas, reciprocity, radical center, pilgrimage, place attachment theory, and hoping like even if someone, like some of my friends, they don't read very much, and I was like, I thought of them as much as I thought about someone who's obsessed with Rachel Carson. I wanted it to be accessible for as many people as possible. But you know what I'll say too, like I'm sure there were people in the 1960s when all these Endangered Species Act and Wilderness Act and Clean Water and Clean Air I'm sure there are people that were pissed that it didn't go far enough. But now when we look back, we think like, no, these laws are so important. Like, I'm glad they figured out a way forward, even if there was some compromise involved, because now we look back and we're like, thank goodness we have these laws to protect species,
Well, that's how Friends of the Earth got started. The Sierra Club wasn't radical enough for them, right? So,
right.
Yeah. So, but being from Michigan, you know that, a lot of the great conservation steps were, the word conservation and the word conservative have a lot of letters in common. And, a lot of the hunters and fishermen were right on the front lines of all of that. So it wasn't necessarily someone from, politically left or center, sometimes to the right. So.
Absolutely. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, kind of like they call the father of conservation. I mean, that's, he was Republican, and, my entire family is Republican, hunters, anglers. I mean, my mom's whole side of the family is from Pennsylvania, and they're, hunting such a big part of their world. They have off school for the first day of hunting, it's like, yeah. That's why I included the hunting chapter in the book, because it's like, how can you tell the story of conservation without tell the story of hunters and anglers? I mean, they tax themselves. That's insane. Like, I'm a hiker, walker, bird watcher. I don't pay any extra taxes on all the gear that I buy for those trips, But yeah, anyway, I don't want to get political, obviously, but I think it's worth including, bringing as many people into the tent as possible.
Yeah.
We may come to the land differently, but we love it just the same,
Right.
And I think people forget that.
Absolutely.
What town in Michigan are you from?
I'm from a little Dutch village called Holland.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. We go there frequently. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't love it growing up, but I'm now looking back, I'm very grateful for my upbringing there.
The Tulip Festival, right?
Yep, the Tulip Festival. I spent a lot of days in a lot of time in the Tulip Festival with my wooden shoes, walking with my school friends in that parade. Yeah.
Hey, May's got a question for you. May.
Hey guys. Thanks, PJ. Hey Josh, so thanks for coming to chat with us.
It's my pleasure.
With BLM land. So it's very cool to see it being talked about. I worked for the BLM in Utah for a period of time, and I was living pretty much full time for several months, just bopping around BLM land, which was so awesome that we can do that.
Yes.
And while I'm not as familiar with California, in your neck of the woods, a lot of the Southwest is brought together by watershed, and the BLM owns so much land of this Colorado River watershed that's really struggling right now. And I'm kind of wondering your thoughts on the BLM role within this current Colorado River water crisis.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll say I'm not an expert in water at all, especially on the Colorado River. I will say that most of that water is not managed by the BLM, but where the BLM gets really involved are like the pipelines leading from that to like alfalfa fields and to cities like St. George and Las Vegas, So the only parts of that I understand are the parts of that the BLM is involved with are those kind of those pipelines that are really controversial. I don't, you probably know way more than I do about the Colorado River crisis that's happening right now. So I wish I could speak to it more, but I don't feel like I don't feel like I have an expert opinion.
Okay, yeah. I've studied some about water out there, and I know Bureau of Rec really is what plays the biggest role.
Yep.
It's just so curious because the BLM land, or there's so much land within the watershed.
Right.
And there's so much of that changing right now. Even this week, the states are meeting and can't even agree on water allocations. So, and I've never really heard a BLM opinion on the Colorado River water crisis. So I don't know. I just figured it might be perspective.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think I like my next book is going to be on Nevada. So I've been doing a lot of traveling to Nevada and talking to a lot of people at the BLM in Nevada and, ranchers and miners and Vegas folks. I know the big story in Nevada was a pipeline that was going to divert water from the Colorado, like kind of at the Three Corners region where the Nevada, Arizona, and Utah meet. And that ultimately got thwarted. Like people in Nevada were so upset about that, and ultimately they didn't do it. But that's kind of all I've experienced with the Colorado River crisis, is that kind of pipeline that just got axed. There's probably way more to be said about should more people be moving to the West when we don't have enough water for everyone. And I live in Los Angeles, so I am part of the problem. I moved from a very wet place to a very dry place. So it's tricky. Like LA stole all of our water from indigenous tribes in the Eastern Sierra Nevada. So, the Owens Lake is literally a dust bowl now because LA built a pipeline from the Owens River, the Owens Lake to LA, and now that lake is gone. So, I don't think we're really, I don't know how to feel about that,
Yeah, there is a lot to be said about indigenous water rights in the Southwest, especially.
Yep.
And everywhere. I'm living in Seattle now, and I'm working with tribes on a day-to-day basis about fish populations. There's a lot to be said about indigenous rights as a whole.
Pretty much everywhere. Yeah, I spent a lot of time with indigenous folks in California for the book, and that was another huge point of learning that I didn't always know how to articulate, because I can't tell their story. So it was, like trying to thread the needle, so to speak. My friend Joseph had a big part in the wilderness chapter, talking about his connection to the land and the way they think about wilderness and language. And I felt like that was poignant. But everywhere you look in California, there's every layer of history you peel back is just a heartbreaking story of loss. And my publishers, they have a lot of indigenous authors, so I was able to talk with them, like, how do I go about this? I'm like a middle-aged white guy with no long-term history here, and they become friends now, but they kind of help me tell that story in a way that lifted them up, but also didn't gloss over it.
That's really neat research you were able to do and get more perspectives on that.
Yeah, it really helped me so much. I mean, it still is, they're all still here. They have a big impact every day on lots of decisions that are made, especially with national monuments, because a lot of our new national monuments, they're co-managed with the tribes. And so we're getting the traditional ecological knowledge that tribes have with the land back on some of these management plans, which is so amazing. It's like another really cool thing about BLM land is that a lot of these new national monuments, they're all managed by the BLM. And now we have these co-management, co-stewardship agreements with the local tribes. It's kind of like a return to, it's not land back, but it's like decision making back. And that makes a big difference.
Totally. I agree. It's very cool to be bringing indigenous ecological knowledge back.
Mm-hmm.
We can learn a lot. So very cool. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions or want to chat about anything?
Well, Josh, I loved your book, and I love the pictures in the book, almost really as well equally. I just loved all of it, and the pictures, they're stunningly beautiful. But in the pictures, you don't see the pictures through the lens of the heartbreak that you talk about. The damage that's been done to the land, whether that was through mineral extraction or logging or the damage to indigenous peoples. And when I read that, I thought a lot about my experience growing up near the Florida Everglades and visiting them with some regularity and thinking it was this great experience in nature with lots of aquatic birds and fish and snakes and deer and all that stuff. And only to learn as I got much older that, us in the last 100 years, we had damaged so much of that river of grass that Marjorie Stoneman Douglas wrote so beautifully about. And so now I see that through a different lens. When I visit the Everglades, I think of, boy, we have really screwed this up. Where before I used to see it as, wow, this is incredible. And one, thank you for everything, the beautiful pictures, but did it change the lens that you see these lands?
Certainly. I did wrestle with that a lot in the book of these photographs. I think my primary mission though was my primary mission still is to get people to see the beauty in BLM lands because they're so forgotten and they are considered leftover by so many people and that nobody goes out to visit these places. And so because of that, so much damage happens to these landscapes because they don't have enough advocates standing up for them. So for me, the photographs, I felt like not only had to be included, but had to showcase the beauty, even if it was subtle sometimes, of these landscapes in order to draw more people out to them in the hopes that they'd experience them. That's why I lead these trips every year with hundreds of people out to these lands to help people see the beauty out there. So that, I mean, I don't think I could have written this book without photography, and I don't think the photographs would have spoken as loudly as if I had photographed some of the damages that were happening on the land. I felt like writing about some of those threats, like you were kind of saying, like writing about the threats and the damage, but then photographing these beautiful landscapes. Hopefully that tension, came through for everyone that hopefully read it, because there is so much tension on BLM land, especially like as I'm going to Nevada now. Like, do you celebrate the beauty of these places? Or do you raise the klaxon alarm for like the threats that they face? And that living in that tension is I think the hardest thing I had to work through as I wrote this book and working on the next one. That tension, but I think just living in that tension and the people hopefully reading it and feeling that tension, I think that's all a good thing, because you can't have beauty. Sorry.
No, finish your sentence. You can't have beauty.
Well, you can't just see the world like with rosy eyes and see the beauty, like going to the Everglades and just thinking this is magical. With like if that's all that's happening, it just feels like there's going to be so much underneath that's like going wrong. We're losing endemic species. But you also can't have a book that's just raising the alarm for all these threats because that's depressing.
Yeah. Well.
To me, so that tension is where I felt like I had to live in that tension in this book, and I don't know, I don't know if I pulled it off, but
you did it as well as anybody else could. I'll finish on this. So I don't know how many people are actually on this this book club video thing that we're doing, but But everybody's beautiful in their own way, and we're all flawed in our own way. But we take the beauty in those flaws together, and hopefully we can still see the beauty in spite of the flaws.
Absolutely. That was so well spoken. Yeah. And I hope that's how people feel about the book.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Love that. Well, I know we've taken a lot of your time, and it's been so amazing that you joined us today. So thank you.
Yeah, it's a dream come true to see all of your wonderful faces and from all over the country. I mean, I took a screenshot because I'm just so enamored by this conversation. And thank you for
a great idea.
taking an interest in the book, and I mean, book clubs are the story of my life. So to be a part of a book club like this is just so special.
Well, awesome. Thank you. I was wondering if as we close out, or before we close out, could you talk a little bit briefly about your foundation and just kind of how you started that? And then if there's any way any of us can get involved, like where would we go to find out? I mean, we have the website to look at for sure, but anything that you would want to say there?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of launched the Forgotten Lands project as like a immersive storytelling project that, I take people out on the land. I write, I've written for magazines. I have some LA Times pieces coming up, and wrote for High Country News about national monuments. And so I'm doing a lot of freelance writing and photography, and then I lead these trips to get people out on the land. And then I write like a weekly Substack newsletter. So if anybody wants to like learn more about BLM landscapes, I do that weekly. It's just Forgotten Lands. Actually, I don't know what the website is, but if you go on my homepage and you scroll down, you'll see a newsletter link, and it's free. You can sign up. And the goal there though is to not just do California, but across the American West. So once it's getting to a point now where I'm going to be able to start hiring writers and photographers who are going to other BLM lands and other states across the West, and I'll be able to tell those stories. They'll tell those stories, but they'll have a platform to do that on my Substack, because that's grown quite a bit in the last couple of years. So it's not yet a project that makes any money, but it's like going in that direction where I can start to do this more full time. But if you're looking for more BLM land stuff, yeah, jump on that newsletter. It's packed full of beautiful imagery that didn't make in the book, and other states, because I'm going to Nevada all the time right now.
I'll for sure be looking for that. I think a lot of us will be looking at the newsletter and learning a bit more. And you also have quite a bit on your website and your events. And like I said, I'm interested in some of those camping trips myself. I did want to remind everybody, because part of this book club that we wanted to do with Nature's Playbook, the Atlas, is that taking literature and what we read about nature and applying it into our experiences outside. And storytelling is very instrumental with Nature's Playbook. And so I hope everybody remembers to take something that they've learned from this book and post something that you've done outside, where others can also maybe learn about an experience, but also the lenses that you used through this book. And maybe it's taking something way of slowing down, or a micro adventure, or maybe it's venturing out to one of these BLM lands. So I don't know if you have any ideas, Josh, but that's something that we encourage all of our members to do. So
that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's those local friend groups are the soul of conservation. They're the easiest way to get involved, other than taking a trash bag and walking the streets, I guess. But what's your next book? I'm interested. What's your next book in the book club?
Well,
do you know yet?
We don't. If you have any recommendations, we are putting out a short list that will come up this week for everyone to take a look at, and then decide.
So I'm sure you're all already read Braiding Sweetgrass probably, but
Actually, I think that's on the list.
oh man, that's like a life altering book. You'll go from the Enduring Wild, and then you'll just take like 80 steps up to Robin Wall Kimmerer. But that's a great book. Yeah, I'm just anyway.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks
Yeah.
again.
Thanks, Johnson.
Thanks
everyone
everyone.
for
It's-
joining.
Yes,
Yeah,
Mark,
thank you.
Thank you.
Talk
Thanks
to
a
you
lot
guys
again.
later.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Bye.
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 Okay.